Hi everyone. So today we're going to start officially Unit 1. Before I do that, I have a few reminders for you. So the first reminder is that you are required to keep a binder for this class, a 3-ring binder. It can be with just my class or all your classes together. It doesn't matter, but you're required to keep a binder. And when I come back, I'll give you more details on that. But you need to know that because all the papers you have for this class, you need to keep them. And it's going to end up being a summative grade for each unit. So don't throw stuff away, keep it organized in a binder, and I'll give you more information. The other reminder is that you got a reading last week, a reading guide on Unit 1, which is also posted online. And you're supposed to be working on that throughout last week and this week. So on Thursday of this week, we're going to have a quiz over 1.1 through 1.3, and you can use those reading questions on the quiz to help you. So some of 1.1 to 1.3 we're going to cover in class this week, but there's a lot more detail in the reading than what we can go over in the time we have in class. So make sure that you're keeping up with that and that you are prepared for your quiz. Okay, so today we're really starting Unit 1, which is where Whap actually starts. So here's just like a little diagram for you, a timeline. So last week we did Unit 0, and it's just background information about early world history. So last week we were mostly talking about BCE times. So civilization, like Mesopotamia that we learned about, started around 3000 BCE, which is about 5,000 years ago from today. Around 1 CE were empires like the Roman Empire and the Han Dynasty in China. And then you see the dotted line, 1200 CE is where this course actually starts. So this first unit includes empires from the time period 1200 to 1450 CE. And then you see 2022 CE, where we are today. So this course actually covers like a relatively small period of history compared to all of world history, but it's important for you to know we're starting just at that date, 1200 to 1450. So Whap is divided into 4 time periods. If you look on the board where the door is, on the side where I have the spiced tea, above that are 4 posters that have the 4 different time periods of Whap. So this first one is 1200 to 1450. So we're going to take notes. You need to follow along on your paper and take notes as I go. Remember, you don't have to write everything down. Use bullet points for the most important things, and these slides will always be online as well. Okay, so Unit 1 is called, they call it the Global Tapestry, which is kind of like this fancy name, but it's really just saying it's all the empires and kingdoms throughout the world in this time period. So it's sort of like if you were in 1200 and you went around the world and visited all these places, like what would you see? So each of the sections in your reading covers a different part of the world. And today we're starting with East Asia. East Asia includes China, Japan. We're mostly going to focus on China because they're very, very influential in the world. So a few things that we need to know. We're going to learn about the systems of government in the Chinese dynasties. We're going to learn about Chinese cultural traditions, and we're going to learn about innovations in the Chinese economy. Okay, so just a little background on how we got there. Chinese history is divided into dynasties. The dynasty that was ruling around the same time as the Roman Empire was the Han. And throughout Chinese history, they view their history in terms of dynasties, which are ruling families where the rule gets passed down through the family through multiple people. And so the dynasty that is in 1200, where we are starting, is called the Song Dynasty. And you see the heading at the top, from 1000 to 1300, China was the most advanced place in the world. So there is a lot of important stuff that comes out of China that we're going to learn about. Okay, So a little brief on the Song Dynasty. The Song Dynasty technology was highly advanced, which we're going to study this week. The population grew very rapidly, and more people lived in cities than any other part of the world. And now finally we get to your first question on your paper. What was the purpose of the civil service exam and what was it based on? So the Song Dynasty government was very advanced. And hopefully if you did the notes from Friday, you learned about the civil service exam and bureaucracy. So a bureaucracy are all the people who actually do the work of the government. In China, they chose those people based on a civil service exam where you had to take a very detailed test. And if you scored well enough on that test, then you could hopefully become a bureaucrat in the government. The civil service exam was based on Confucianism. So it was based on the philosophies of Confucius. That was like the government, the philosophy that the government used in governing. And you might remember from last week, Confucianism said, everybody needs to know their place. So we need to have a strong social hierarchy, and that is what will keep order in society. And so the Song Dynasty continued that. So to become a bureaucrat, they had to take a civil service exam. Many of the questions were based on Confucianism. Civil service exams were open to all men. However, usually only the upper class passed. That's because to have the knowledge to be successful on this test, you would have to be pretty educated. And generally in this time, only the wealthy could afford to be educated because everybody else has to work all the time. There's no public education. And so it was rare, but not impossible for lower classes to get into the civil service or the bureaucracy. All right, another important term related to China in this time period are tribute systems. So a tribute system is when there is another state or empire that has to pay money or goods or honor to your state, in this case, China. So there were other states that had to pay money or goods or honor to the Chinese emperor. What a tribute system is really saying is we as the stronger empire, so in this case, China, will pretty much leave you alone and not destroy you if you pay us. So they have to pay tribute and honor to China in order to continue to exist. An example is the Silla Kingdom of Korea had to pay tribute to the Song Dynasty. A side effect of this is that it stimulated trade with other parts of Asia because there starts to be goods flowing from one place in Asia to another. And in addition to paying goods, usually the tribute state had to send representatives to honor the emperor. So representatives from tribute states had to kowtow to the emperor. The kowtow is like a bow where you have to bend so far that your head actually touches the ground. So this was like a ritual that tribute representatives had to perform in front of the Song emperor to show that they were saying China is superior. Because think about if you come before someone and you basically have to like humble yourself laying on the ground in front of them. It's showing that they are superior and you are inferior. Later, we're going to learn that this actually flipped and the Song Dynasty became weak and had to start paying tribute to other nomadic groups surrounding China, but we'll learn about that later. Okay, let's talk about the economy of the Song Dynasty. So the first thing to know is that the Song Dynasty was hugely urbanized, which means people were living in cities. As much as 10% of the population lived in cities. For us today, that's like nothing. But in the Middle Ages throughout the world, there was no other place on earth that had that much of their population living in cities. So it was much, much higher than the other civilizations of the time. The reason that cities are important is that cities are places of business and places of trade. So marketplaces developed in the towns and cities. The government even got involved in regulating the markets that grew. And the Song Dynasty had a new capital, Hangzhou, that had over 2 million people. Again, for today, I mean, that's a large city, but it's nothing, it's not unbelievable. But in this time period, that was enormous. And so it became a very important city for trade and for commerce. The Song Dynasty farmers were also very efficient and very productive. The farmers produced enough to sell a surplus at the market. So whenever you have a city, usually people in the city are not farming. So they need to be getting their food from somewhere else. Just think about us. Like, we live in San Antonio. We don't, maybe some of you have a garden, but most of us, we buy our food at H-E-B probably. So somebody has to be producing that food. The reason that people can live in cities is if there's a surplus of agriculture. Like, there's enough food being produced that it frees up people to do other things. And so that was the case in the Song Dynasty. Merchants also became more specialized and organized. So they had just a ton of new products that were being produced. Merchants became organized into guilds, and the guilds would arrange sales. Guilds are just groups of craftspeople or merchants who work together and like build up their own power. Often they're people who produce the same thing. So like people who are all blacksmiths form a guild, and they work together to improve their industry. Okay, another important thing is the Grand Canal. So the Grand Canal was built and it connected northern and southern China, like you see on the map. This increased communication. It also made it easier to transport people and products throughout China. The most important part of this is it connected northern China with the very fertile farmland of southern China. So southern China had more fertile farmland and was needed to support the north. The canal also allowed military and government workers to move around really easily. And the finished canal was over 1,000 miles long. It connected, again, the north to the south. Another thing that China had that a lot of other empires at the time had was a communication system with roads, horses, runners, and rest stations that was run by the government. So if they needed to get a message throughout this very large empire, they had to maintain infrastructure, in this case roads, and they had to have horses and runners on standby to be able to get messages throughout the empire. Both of these things helped the Song Dynasty to be able to maintain control of this really big empire. All right, the Song Dynasty also was very active in trading throughout the world. And trade is just the exchange of goods for other goods. People trade when they want to get resources or products that aren't available in their area. The Song Dynasty traded along a trade route that had been started back in like Roman Empire times, which is called the Silk Road. So look at this map at the top. Here's China way over on the right side. Here's the Middle East here, and then Europe kind of off the map over here, and then North Africa here. So this trade route went all the way across Asia to the Middle East, carrying products back and forth. It was one of the most important overland trade routes in the whole world at the time. It's called the Silk Road because one of the most valuable products that was traded was silk from China, but there were all kinds of products that were traded. And it's not just like one single road. It's not like you can go to a road and it's like, this is the Silk Road. It's just a direction of trade. Some of the products that China exported throughout the world were silk. Silk is made from the cocoons of silkworms, and for a long time, the Chinese were the only people that knew how to do that, and so it was a very, very valuable product for them. Porcelain, which is a type of ceramics, and paper. Paper was invented in China as well and became a major export. The Chinese also traded throughout the ocean, especially in the Indian Ocean, on very technologically advanced ships called junks, and they traded overseas. They also invented two other things that helped them with sailing. The compass was invented in China. Also the rudder. The rudder is like a flap at the back of a ship that moves back and forth and enables the ship to steer. They also traded with, like, one example of an empire they traded with is the Abbasids, which were in the Middle East at the time through the Silk Road and the Indian Ocean. They also developed a lot of methods, which you'll learn more about in your reading, of how to conduct trade. So like today, we use cash. A lot of us probably use cards when we go places and there's money in an account somewhere and we use that. But all that kind of stuff had to be developed. So if you're going to go trade over a very long distance, how are you actually going to buy and sell stuff? Like, what currency are you going to use? And so the Chinese developed a lot of innovations to help with that. They were the first ever in the world to use paper money. For thousands of years before, people had used coins. But as you know, coins can be kind of annoying to carry. If you want to carry like vast sums of money, it's not going to really be easy to carry it in coins. So they were the first people to develop paper money. They also developed something called flying money, also called flying cash, which was like a credit voucher, almost like a check that overseas traders could take with them. Like they could carry a piece of paper and then turn it in at their destination for money. So it helped protect against robbery because trade at this time was very dangerous. If you're moving across the Silk Road, people assume that you have money, you have valuable products, and so robbery was a big problem. And this is just a map of Indian Ocean trade, which we're going to learn a lot more about in the future. But you can see China on the map, and then it's connected through Indian Ocean trade to Southeast Asia, to India, to the Middle East, and even to Africa. All right, let's look at some technological innovations. And you actually see one in this image, which is terraced farming, where the hills have been cut to make flat areas for farming, in this case, rice. All right, so rice cultivation grew during the Song Dynasty, and new strains of rice developed, which were more productive. They also developed new forms of irrigation, and it was the government's job to maintain irrigation. And irrigation is just all different ways of getting water where you need it to go so that you can grow crops. One of the new strains of rice that was used in the Song Dynasty is champa rice. Champa rice is drought resistant. It's also fast ripening. And I'll give you just like a little info on champa rice and why this is such a big deal. So normally there's a growing season, usually in the summer, that when people can grow. Let's just say from like May to August, people can grow food and grow certain crops. And traditional rice, it took that whole time, that whole season to grow it, and then you harvest it, and then that's it. And then you're done for that year. Champa rice grew so fast that you could grow it, it would come to maturity, you could harvest it, you could plant it again and grow it again before the growing season ended and it became too cold. So a lot of times you could get 2 harvests out of one season. And so it doubled production of rice in some areas. Champa rice was not from China. It was actually from Vietnam. But because, remember, China was trading a lot with different parts of the world, with trade also comes cultural diffusion. And so people learned about this new strain of rice and started growing it in China. Okay, this is the type of question we're going to have on our unit tests. It'll also be the type of question that we'll have on the AP exam. This is called a stimulus-based multiple choice question. All the questions on the AP exam are stimulus-based, which means stimulus means they give you a passage or a picture or a map or a graph or something that you have to interpret with your own knowledge of history and answer a question. So usually the passage alone is not enough to answer the question. Usually you have to have the passage and your own knowledge of history that you're going to learn this year to answer the question. So we're going to do some examples throughout this first unit to introduce that to you and start getting used to those types of questions. So the first thing I recommend is to read the question before you read the passage. So we'll read the first part of the question. The activities of the state described in the passage are consistent with which of the following Song Dynasty policies? So we know that we're trying to figure out or look for activities of the state, or like what is the government doing and how does that relate to the Song Dynasty? The second thing you should always read when you get a stimulus-based question is the source information, which in this case is the bottom. If you just start reading the passage without reading the source information, you don't really know like what you're reading. If you read the source information, it gets your brain thinking about stuff you might already know. And it kind of prepares you to better understand what the source is. So this one is a Buddhist monk, China, 11th century CE. So a Buddhist in China. I'm going to read the passage to you. Then I want you to pause the video and think about it and answer the question. Okay. Emperor Zhengzong, being deeply concerned with agriculture, came to know that the champa rice was drought resistant and that the green lentils of India were famous for their heavy yield and large seeds. Special envoys bringing precious things were dispatched with a view to securing these varieties. When the first harvests were reaped in the autumn, the emperor called his closest ministers to taste them and compose poems for champa rice and Indian green lentils. All right, so think about to yourself, what is the emperor doing? Because our question said the activities of the state described in the passage. So think about, what is the emperor doing? How does this go with the policies of the song? So go ahead and pause the video here. Give yourself a minute to think about your answer and then unpause. Okay, so the activities of the state that I see in the passage is that he's very concerned with agriculture. He is concerned with bringing in products like champa rice, and it also mentions lentils. He sends special envoys. Envoys are like ambassadors or government people going to other places to bring back these agricultural products. And it's clearly very, very important to him. And so what the question is asking is the activities that he's doing are consistent or similar to which of the following Song Dynasty policies? Do I have the answers in here? I thought I did. Okay, well, let me go over it with you in case it's not there. So the other answer choice that also talks about trying to improve the economy, just like champa rice did, is letter D. Increasing state investment in economic development, such as improving the Grand Canal. So that answer choice is most similar to what he said, what this passage says about champa rice and its impact on the economy. Okay, this question uses the same passage. So pause the video, go ahead and read the question, and then unpause. All right, so this one, the agricultural developments described in the passage contributed most directly to which of the following? So champa rice and bringing in lentils had the impact of population growth, A, and urbanization in southern China. So the Song Dynasty's population grew tremendously because there was so much more food available for people. So A is the correct answer. All right, China, I mentioned before, were the first ever to develop paper money. So the use of paper currency was initiated by merchants. The earliest Chinese coins looked like this. They had a hole in the middle so that you could string them. If you're like a merchant, you could put them on a string and easily carry them with you. Over time, they transitioned to using coins, but also using paper money because it was easier to carry. You can see here the Tang dynasty right before the Song started trading receipts from deposit shops where they had left money or goods. And so they started like making these systems to be able to use paper currency rather than only using coins, which was really helpful when you're traveling long distances to trade. We're going to learn a lot more about other innovations this week. We're going to do an activity where you're going to actually teach us about one of the innovations. There's more innovations at the end of this slideshow. We're not going to go over those slides, but they're going to be on Schoology. So if you need to review those innovations or use them for your activity, they're there for you. And I'll show you that. Okay, let's do one more question. So remember, read the question first. The interactions in the excerpt are best understood in the context of which of the following developments in 9th century China? So then read the source information. So it says from Gabriel Ferrand, he was from India to China. He traveled from India to China, and he's writing, this is written much later. In China, commercial transactions are carried out with the aid of copper coins. These copper coins serve as the money of the land. The Chinese have gold, silver, fine pearls, fancy silk textiles, raw silk, and all this in large quantities. But they are considered commodities, and only copper coins serve as money. The Chinese conduct commercial transactions and business affairs with equity. When someone lends money to another person, he writes up a note documenting the loan. The borrower writes up another note on which he affixes an imprint of his index finger and middle finger together. Then they put the two notes together, roll them up, and write a formula at the point where one touches another. Next, they separate the notes and entrust to the lender the one on which the borrower recognizes his debt. So the interactions in the excerpt are best understood in the context of which of the following developments in 9th century China? So go ahead and pause the video and read over those, come up with an answer in your mind, and then unpause it. All right, so in the passage, it talks about all these exports of the Chinese, and then it talks about how they conduct transactions, how they write up paperwork when they make loans, how they give notes to borrowers. And so those kind of like business transactions, which answer choice does that best go with? And the correct answer is A. It shows the growing interregional trade and specialization in China. Because the reason they had to develop all these methods of having different business transactions is because they're trading so much and doing so much business with other people. Okay, Chinese cultural traditions. So Buddhism came to China from India along the Silk Road. This is hugely important to know. So we learned last week that Buddhism started in India. And whenever people trade, they naturally take their culture, their religion, like everything about them with them. And so what happened is people were trading from India to China, or Chinese went to India on the Silk Road, and they met people who were Buddhist, and they learned about their religion, and it appealed to them. And eventually some of those people converted and they went back to China. And so Buddhism started to spread in China. Monks introduced Buddhism to China by relating it to Taoist principles. So let's talk about what a monk is. A monk, the female version is a nun, is someone who decides they're going to kind of separate from society and devote their life to their religion. So in the United States, this is probably most familiar through the Catholic Church, has nuns. If you've ever gone, some people may have gone to Catholic school when they were younger and nuns taught you. So these are people that have decided they're going to devote their life to the Catholic Church. In this case, these are people who decided they're going to devote their life to Buddhism. Not all religions have monks and nuns, but Christianity, where the Catholic Church, part of Christianity does, and Buddhism does. Monks were hugely influential in spreading the religion. So they related it to Taoist principles. For example, the Buddhist term Dharma translated to the Tao or the way, which is part of Taoism in China. And a new form of Buddhism called a syncretic faith developed called Zen Buddhism. Zen blended Buddhist ideas with Taoist ideas. And syncretic or syncretism is a really important word for this class, which means blending of two things together. So a syncretic faith is one that takes parts of different religions and blends them together. And monasteries, which is where monks live, started to appear all throughout China. Okay. When religions spread, they often change and they adapt to the place they're going, or maybe the place that they're going makes changes to the religion to fit their culture. So religions are always adapting, especially when they go to new places. The type of Buddhism that emerged in China was called Mahayana. The other one you see here, Theravada Buddhism, is popular in Southeast Asia, and we'll talk more about that when we get to Southeast Asia. But Mahayana Buddhism is a form of Buddhism that developed in China. So let's just focus on that part. Mahayana Buddhism focused on spiritual growth for everyone and on service. This was a movement that believed enlightenment was universal and possible for all. Okay, so in Buddhism originally in India and in Southeast Asia, it was thought that you had to probably go through many lives to become enlightened. You probably had to leave behind all your possessions like the Buddha did and go live like in the forest and live a very simple life and meditate all the time, and then you could achieve enlightenment or nirvana. But Mahayana Buddhism changed that, and it said enlightenment is achievable for everyone. So this was especially appealing to like poor people. Because if you're poor and you have to farm every day, you don't have time to sit and like just meditate, you live a pretty harsh life. I mean, you are struggling for survival. That's your life. And so this idea that you can become enlightened and achieve nirvana without going through many more lifetimes, without having to give a bunch of money and offerings to the monasteries, and without having to do all these different things, that really appealed to people. And so Mahayana became really popular. Another change that Mahayana implemented is that they worshipped Buddha as a god. So Buddha, originally his teachings, again in India, did not say he was a god. He was an enlightened person, and you as a Buddhist were supposed to model yourself after him, but he wasn't a god like we have in other religions, especially like the monotheistic religions. But in China, part of Mahayana Buddhism was they started to worship Buddha as a god. Okay, let's talk about how Buddhism changed and how people responded to it within China. So Buddhism came to China before the Song dynasty. In a previous dynasty called the Tang, it had become very popular. The Tang leaders had initially supported Buddhism. So, and a good example of this is Empress Wu, who you see here, built Buddhist statues, shrines, monasteries, like all over China to promote Buddhism. You can see like huge statues of Buddha. Eventually, Buddhism became so popular and there was a backlash against Buddhism. Buddhism was attacked as a foreign religion. Now, is that true? Yeah, because it came from India. It was not Chinese. And so other groups within China started to attack Buddhism and said, we need to return to things that are traditionally Chinese. So, and they tried to recruit people to their beliefs. So Taoists, for example, tried to emphasize like the mystical or magical powers of nature to recruit people back to Taoism. The scholar gentry, who were the bureaucrats in China, did not like Buddhism. Okay, now let's pause and think about this. The scholar gentry are the bureaucrats. So they have taken the civil service exam to get their positions. The civil service exam was based all on Confucianism. So their whole position and their wealth and their status depends on the government continuing to follow Confucianism. So when they see Buddhism becoming so popular, they feel threatened, and they don't like that. And so they came up with strategies to attack Buddhism. One of the things they said was, look at these Buddhist monasteries that have sprung up all throughout China. People give offerings to the monasteries. The monasteries are super wealthy, and they don't pay us any taxes. Just like today, religious organizations are exempt from a lot of taxes in the United States. So it's a similar idea. But they're saying, hey, look at them. They're not like pulling their weight. They're not contributing to the country. And so eventually there was a backlash against Buddhism among the government, and it became a persecuted religion by the government in China. This all led to the start of a new philosophy and a revival of Confucianism, which is called Neo-Confucianism. All right, so neo means new. So this is like the new Confucianism. We know that Confucian teachings were central to the civil service exam, and they were central to the power and identity of the scholars and the bureaucrats. And that Confucianism has had a huge influence in China already by this time for like 1,000 years. As Buddhism became so popular, it forced Confucianism to change in order to keep its followers. So they created kind of their own blend of Confucianism with some Buddhist ideas. So it says they created their own account of the human and physical world in response to competition from Buddhism. So Neo-Confucianism is a revival of Confucian study. And then it also brought in parts of Buddhism. So a lot of Buddhism is like morality and self-reflection through meditation. So Confucianism started to adopt those principles as well. So Neo-Confucianism, again, is a revival of Confucianism with little parts of Buddhism added to help make Neo-Confucianism appeal more to the people. And we're going to learn more about this this week. All right, now, in Confucian teachings, Confucius had said the family is the most basic unit of society. So we learn that term filial piety. People have to respect and obey their parents and put the interests of the family before their own. So filial piety is to take care of one's parents and also to just like be a good moral person in the world, because you don't want to do anything that would bring shame upon your family or your ancestors. Family is super important. And so you're always thinking about how you can contribute to your family and make your family better off. All right, this also had an impact on the role of women within China. And a practice called foot binding began during the Song dynasty, and it's very closely tied to Neo-Confucianism and this revival of Confucianism. Now, in Confucianism, traditionally, it preached submission of women, that the male head of household was in charge and everyone, especially the wife, had to be subordinate to him. Buddhism had traditionally, like before it came to China, had said everybody can be enlightened, even women. So it gave women a little more equality. And this changed with Neo-Confucianism, because as Confucianism was revived, the people in charge in China wanted to revive the whole submission of women policy. And so foot binding was part of that. All right, now this is going to sound crazy to some of us, but I'm going to explain it and then why this happened and like why it became a status symbol. So foot binding was a policy or a practice where women were supposed to make their feet very, very tiny, like only 3, 4, 5 inches long. So hold up your hand about what you think is like 4 inches and hold it next to your foot. Even if you have tiny feet, it's probably way smaller than your foot. The way this was achieved is if you were a girl and when you were about 5 years old, your mother would break your toes, bend them under your foot, and wrap them very, very tightly with bandages to hold them there and not allow your foot to get any bigger. Over time, this would completely destroy the structure of your foot so that you could only walk with your feet were bandaged, and women who had their feet bound had to take like tiny little baby steps. They were kind of like unstable walking. They certainly couldn't run or do anything really physical like that. So the goal was to keep feet tiny. Tiny feet became a symbol of beauty it was considered like even like sexy for women to have these tiny feet, and it became a symbol of status. The reason it became a symbol of status is that women who have this done cannot work. In poor families, everybody contributes. Like everybody in the family goes out into the fields and works at farming and contributes to the family. So by having these tiny feet, you're saying that you're wealthy enough that you don't have to work because you physically can't because of your tiny feet. It also made women more marriageable. So this became a symbol of attractiveness, and women, if you wanted to get a good husband, which at the time, that's sort of like your only choice as a woman. If you want to marry into a good family, you have to have tiny feet to be considered like worthy of that. Now, over time, this spread to even poor families, where if you were from a poor family as a mother, you might bind your daughter's feet and keep them small, even if you're in poverty. Why would you do that? You might already understand where I'm going. Because you hope that when your daughters grow up, they can get married into a higher status family if they have small feet. And daughters at the time were seen as a burden to the family, and you wanted your daughters to be married, and then they become part of your husband's family, and you don't have to take care of them and feed them anymore. That was the view. So China was a very patriarchal, which means male-dominated society. This continued until the early 20th century. We're going to learn way later in the year that China became communist in the 20th century, and this was outlawed. So today in China, the only people that would still have this are super elderly people. It's not done anymore. But it lasted for hundreds of years. And again, this relates to Neo-Confucianism because this is a revival of Confucianism, and along with that, submission of women. And just the practice itself is submissive because, I mean, the women can barely walk. So they're not going anywhere. They have to obey, what is told to them if they have this done. Okay. The last question here, let's look at this one, is a practice. So this is from a Song Dynasty scholar and official from the Problems of Women. The author's view of the relationship between a wife and husband, as well as between a mother and her son, are most clearly affected by. So we're looking for the relationship between husband and wife and mother and son. So go ahead and pause the video here, read the passage, come up with an answer to the question in your mind, and then unpause. Okay, so in this passage, it talks about women being very submissive. Women being moral, they can't have extramarital affairs, but yet the husbands are often doing bad stuff, even falling into debt. The sons sometimes even falsify papers. So it's talking about women being submissive, both with husband and wife and with mother and son. And so where did that come from? It's from Confucianism. So letter C, the resurgence of Confucianism in the Tang and Song dynasties within China, is the correct answer. Now, we are done, but I just want to show you this. The next several slides contain info from the reading. We're not going to go over them in class, but they're here for you. So if you feel like you struggled with the reading or you need more information, it is here for you. Here's a lot more information about China. And then starting hopefully tomorrow, if I'm back, we're going to do an activity. We're going to look at some of the inventions of China, and there's slides about a lot of the inventions. So keep that in mind once we get to that activity, that there's more information on Schoology within this slideshow. Also in the reading, it goes into other parts of Asia that were influenced by China, like Korea and Vietnam. Again, we're not going to go into that, and Japan, but there's information here if you feel like you need it from the reading.